Hi, Kimberly here, talking to you, to guests, or sometimes to myself. Join me for spontaneous conversations, Bible studies, or a little creative expression. It's a biblical buffet. Hope you enjoy this episode of HolySmorgasBlog.
I want to talk to my sister Leah here and you about how do you create? How do you have an outlet for creativity when you have no time? I know people who are, married, working full time, sometimes more jobs than one, and have multiple children. And she's kind of an example of that. How do you squeeze in that creative outlet? What if you're called to creativity? Where do you fit that in? How do you fit in creativity with as busy as you are, right? So I work full time. I'm a wife. We have a son. We have extra business, family business, other things like that. You can't afford to not do the creative things.
What do you mean by you can't afford not to?
So the problem is that you're going through the priorities of how to take care of family or business or other things like that. But then in there, if you're creative, which most of us are, most of who we're talking to today, when you're truly a creative, the moment that you stop creating, it actually messes up your whole balance of everything. It's kind of like if your house or your finance or something major is out of whack, everything's out of whack. And so in a creative's life, if your creative life is out of whack, you yourself start getting symptomatic. It can be, you might be more crabby or more exhausted or more other things like that. But sometimes even when you're super, super, super busy and you have the right creative project, it will actually propel you, like you get more energy than you would from just being busy and getting all your stuff done. It helps balance those things because it helps give you that surge that you need as a creative person to like keep going, right? So you're like, okay, I want to do this creative project. I also know that I have to do this with my family. I know I have this with my job, this with my business, other things like that. And somehow it all balances out.
You can't afford not to be creative. What are some of the symptoms or some more of the symptoms you get when you don't have that outlet?
So when you don't have that outlet, sometimes I feel like personally people have things that may resemble things close to depression. And it's not to undermine people who truly do suffer from it, but you actually start not feeling a purposefulness. Sometimes you feel tired, sometimes you feel hopeless or other things like that. And part of that is you're just not getting out the true you. The true you just hasn't shown up or isn't really allowed to do anything. So one of the things that is hard for me is when people are like, oh, just take time for yourself or just take an hour here or there, whatever. Like somehow you can carve out this magical time and life doesn't work that way, right? But you have to try to figure out times here or there or just realize, because some of these symptoms, you start becoming really tired or lethargic, or you start becoming not quite yourself, but then it affects every other area. So if you have a project that's really bringing to life who you really are, then when you're working on family things, work things, business things, other community things or whatever, you actually have more energy because this is you. Like all of you is coming out. And when you're creative, you become more alive, you become more of yourself, you become energized, you become more alert. Just everything is different because you're doing what you feel like you're supposed to be doing. So somewhere in life, you're kind of told you have to be responsible, right? So you have to work this job, you have to take care of this family, you have to do these things. And this is true. You do need to be responsible. But at the same time, you also have a part of you that you have to express. And creative things aren't always so concrete that you go, oh, at this time, I'm going to have an hour and I'm going to just be creative. Like life doesn't always work that way. So you have to start figuring out ways to work it into your everyday life because you can't afford to not show up. You can't afford to not be you.
So we've talked about creative constipation before. Something similar to what you were saying is most of us who are creatives, all of us are created to create, but most of us who do it regularly or as a lifestyle or hobby or as income, if we aren't doing it, what happens is we start getting symptomatic. We start, like you said, we start showing signs of things that we may or may not know are because we don't have that outlet, that creative expression. We may get, like you listed, it almost seems like you're depressed. And all you need is a season of creativity and you feel better. There have been times when I haven't been able to express myself creatively and I just feel off and I can't quite pinpoint it. if I'm called to create, and if I'm called to do anything, but in this case, create, and I'm not doing it, I'm not being who I was built and created to be. And it's not fair to me, and it's not fair to anyone around me.
And so sometimes I've met people along the way who bring a portion of their creative life with them. Like I used to have a boss who had drumsticks at his desk. And so just having them handy, and once in a while you just hear something in the background and you just go, okay, you haven't let that part go, because somewhere in your mind you go, oh, I'm going to get to that. And I don't know if that always happens. So true. When you're working, when you have family, when you have businesses, when you have other commitments or other things like that, I mean, it would be great to just go, oh, on these days I'll be able to work on the creative stuff. And then you end up having like rooms in your house, or you have unfinished projects or all these other things. And I think those things actually weigh on your soul.
Yeah.
Like you start thinking, oh, I'm going to get to that, or you start dusting around them, or it just keeps building and building, and you don't do anything because somehow you think there's going to be time to do that. But then there's like almost an emotional overwhelmingness that even if you did have the time, you don't always do it. There's got to be bite-sized moments to biting off some of these creative moments or projects or time to be able to get to the real you, even if it's something super small. So sometimes even just watching people, if it's a YouTube video or something else, doing some of the things that you're interested in doing just helps stir it up. Because a lot of times as a creative, you don't have some of those same creative people in your world.
True.
So if you're, if you do ceramics or other things like that, you don't necessarily have an oven in your house or anything else like that. But being able to see people or take a class or other things like that, sometimes those things help. But keeping yourself exposed to that to just keep that going is like, even if it's like 10 seconds a day, like a page or something else like that comes on your feed so you can kind of follow it, but it just keeps it stirring so that you start gravitating more towards that and you towards it.
One of the other examples is, and I'll let Leah tell you more of it, but when she got married, newborn child, and working full time, her question was, how do I get things done? And so as we're brainstorming on the phone, it's like, you start with 5 minutes. You start with 5 minutes. We're brainstorming on where do you even squeeze in 5 minutes, And so sometimes we have to choose our minutes, choose where it is, and even do something that's attainable. So if it's drumsticks at your desk, if it's sitting in the restroom with a notepad and writing 2 lines to a song, here's the thing. If you do that even once a month, in 12 months,
right,
you're going to have the song.
Right.
In 12 months, you're going to have pounded out, a few songs or gotten an idea for a song. Those little steps, sometimes we diminish the importance and the impact on us and the people around us,
right,
when they're just tiny little steps. But for our soul's sake, and sometimes our own sanity, even if it's little chippings, we have to chip away at whatever we want to build and get that creativity out.
Sometimes not all of the circumstances or environment's going to be well. Like some people need like an environment to write in or environment to create in. And those of you who get a chance to get that, that's awesome. Most of us who work full time and have kids and other things like that, that doesn't exist. Like that's not a thing. So you have to work it into your world or try to figure out other ways, even in it, like you said, it might be just 2 to 5 minutes. And so
how do you do that as a mom, wife, full-time worker, when you have to do things that require it to be quiet, or you need focus time, and yet you have the noise factor and the lack of time? What do you personally do to squeeze in creativity?
Sometimes there are things that I just let go of. Like sometimes I just have to get it out. There have been times I've actually recorded stuff into my phone just to make sure that I'm getting it out. You can literally hear my kid screaming in the background. I'm going through some drive-through window. They're taking my order. But I mean, you still have to get it out, right? Because at that moment, creativity isn't one of those things that you can always time either. You go, oh, I'm going to be creative at this time that I have free. Like, so good. So having the technology helps, just getting out what you can and keep building on that. And so I know people who are writers and they need certain environments and certain blocks of time, other things like that. You might literally just need to be typing on your lunch break for 10 minutes, or you might literally might need to just dictate into your phone and just start getting some of the ideas out. I know people who do script writing or other types of writing and just use like index cards or something. And even if you can at least do a line or two through time, like you said, if you have 5 minutes at a time, at the end of the year, you have something rather than having ideas stuck in your head and in your soul for long periods of time. You always think and hope that you're going to get to them. And so the regret is how much time has gone by and you haven't made any progress. So you're feeling like, oh, this isn't good. But if you start to see a little progress at a time and start to come to a place where you're close to completion, you start getting momentum.
Yes, it creates momentum. And that's one of the points is, even if you're chipping away, even if you're doing your 5 minutes a week, a month, it does create momentum and it encourages you.
If you are a parent, a spouse, if you are a caregiver, if you work full-time, all of these things, it's not irresponsible to work on some of your creative things. There are other people who are depending on you in life, and thank God that you're able to help them and be there for them. At the same time, there are other things. There's a reason that you're creative. So part of your creative gift might be for helping other people, helping you, or for other uses. And so you can't not do those things or think those things are so much less important than the other things of helping these other people with, or helping work, or all these other responsibilities. But I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of irresponsible to not do what you're made to do. It's good. So some people might do it as a hobby or other things like that. And yes, I understand bills, I understand family, I understand things like that. But your true self, at some point, you will have to face yourself and go, okay, this is really what I've always wanted to do, and do that, and not think of yourself as being irresponsible.
Many of my friends, and in particular, my married friends, when one or both are creative, they have had to make arrangements and make sure that one or both get that time to create. And so they schedule it in, and you have to lock it in because stuff is always going to come up, especially in the family dynamic. So making sure that you not only schedule it, but each person in the relationship respect that time. That is their slot to create. And that, again, not only gives momentum to the creative process, but also relationally.
So do whatever you can to create. Find any type of technology, find any little window that you possibly can, and just do it. Don't think about it. Don't wait for all the things to be right. Just the moment that you can, or the moments that you can make, go for it.
Don't not do it because you can't do it in full. Don't not do it because you don't have the 3 hours that you want.
There it is.
Instead of the 5 minutes that you have.
There it is.
She said, when you have a creative idea. And I'd like to add to that is, there are some times when you don't have the idea yet, but you are yearning, longing to be creative. You don't know in which way yet because you don't even have time to think, to articulate, to interpret what you have going on in you that's creative. But you know, like, there's something I need to get out. I don't even have a second to think about it. And so that's where your 5 minutes, your 15 minutes, your hour, whatever you can squeeze in consistently or not, whatever you can squeeze in, you'll start to be able to interpret what's in your soul. Just write it down, record it, make it, do it. Start with one brick, whatever you have to do, and the interpretation of what you're feeling in there, that creative constipation, whatever you're feeling in there will start to flow. Pun intended.
My heart just still goes out to people who, like you said, like you feel like you're squeezing in time, or you just don't have it, or other things like that. Like, you are doing amazing. So if you're even thinking about being creative, if you're even thinking about working these things into your life, if you're even trying to balance all these things and you're completely exhausted and you're like, I can't even imagine getting back to that. Just the fact that your heart's cry is still there, but there's so many things going on. Don't give up. Don't give up, because there are seasons for creativity. So sometimes you just recognize your season, realize that it's not permanent. Don't accept it as permanent. Realize there might be quieter times or better times, and hang in there if you can.
Another idea is to make it a family thing. There's sometimes when a spouse that isn't creative may not actually get your creative side. And maybe you can do it as a family. Do something as a family, whatever you do or want to do. Make it a requirement, that a bonding opportunity for your family. Your spouse and or children will not only understand more of what you are and what you long to do, but maybe they'll catch the bug. there have been seasons where I haven't been able to create in groupings. I haven't been able to sit down and create and finish and execute. I've just gotten tidbits of an idea, a line, a word, a drawing, an impression, and I just wrote everything down. So I have a book of ideas. I have little mini books I'll transfer to my large book, but I have a book and it has all my ideas in it. And some of it seems like it's disjointed, but there have been times when I've gotten into the future and then I've thought, oh, that's why that makes sense now. And pieces have started to come together and the puzzle began to make sense to me. But just get it out, even if it doesn't make sense. And even if you feel like, it's not done or it's not enough, not doing it is not enough, right? Right. Doing something creative is more than enough, and more than, not to compare you to other people and say more than most people, but most people who don't have time or don't think they have time to create just don't at all. You have to do something.
But then additionally is there some things are habit, right? So some people are completely caught up on social media, they're completely caught up on the news, they're completely caught up in so many areas, right? So somehow there's a habit of just staying informed, right? But what happens if there's a habit of spending 5, 10, 15 minutes working on something creative or practicing or other things like that, and just making sure that you don't really have long blocks of time or other things like that, but just creating a habit that you just go, okay, maybe this amount of minutes per day, per week, I'm just going to do this. And it just becomes a habit of things you do because, say for instance, like there's seasons. So when you're working on your house, there might be certain seasons that people like garden or work on their lawn or other things like that. And somehow those are actually creative things, but it's acceptable because everyone is supposed to do something, right? Like it's an acceptable thing.
Right.
But it also is a habit. Like you need to be working that into your habit. So just finding ways of finding out what the season is and if it's acceptable to everyone else or not, just making sure that you're doing your part.
That totally makes sense because oftentimes we don't get things done. We don't do things. We don't change. We don't develop those habits or change those habits because the stakes aren't high enough. Some people don't change their diet or their exercise until death is knocking on their door. So when the stakes are high, are often when we do incorporate or change habits. I also have a few friends who don't have the time that they would like to create. And oftentimes we're creating in a bubble. We're creating by ourselves. A lot of times creativity is very isolated. So I have a couple of friends who just give me a call. And it may not even be a brainstorming session. It may just be that they want to chat on the topic. There are times when I have an idea for a blog or something, and I'll call my sister and I'll just start talking about the topic, and she may not have anything to say about it, but something will start stirring in me, and I'll be able to better articulate what is stirring. So one of the ways to squeeze in time or make better use of time to be creative is give somebody a call that kind of stirs you up, that encourages you, or even that you can brainstorm with. Right. Because even brainstorming can better shape and form an idea, which saves time.
And sometimes changing environment, just even for 15 minutes, makes a huge deal.
That's huge.
So if you're a mom, or if you work at home or other things like that, like you don't always get this room that you can go to and be creative. Like it doesn't exactly work that way, even if you have an extra room in the house. So if you have to go to the library or if you have to go sign up for a class or something else like that, getting into a whole nother environment kind of forces you to think differently, or the demands that are on your everyday life, they don't exist in sometimes those spaces.
Such a great point. And even with me, I'm not a mom, and I have a very creative environment. I would say my home is basically a production house, and still sometimes I have to change up my environment. And I live in Los Angeles, and you can go to almost any coffee shop there, and there are people, screenwriters and people writing groups. And one of the reasons is because your soil, your atmosphere really makes a difference. And so sometimes I'll leave my home production house and I'll just, like she said, I'll go to these different places. Sometimes I'll go to the mountains and be looking over some beautiful view with my laptop. Sometimes it's just with a notebook. I bet you that if you just got out of the house with your laptop or notebook or whatever you are creative with, whatever you get your ideas out with, if you just got out of the house, you'd somehow find time. because it forces you to focus and quiet down your soul. There have been times when our circle of people, I'll just say you and I especially, let me just say me. I have called and said, hey, here's the deal. I need you to talk to me like a coach. I need you to just slap me right now, and it'll snap me out of something, and I'll all of a sudden be able to all of a sudden have the capacity to create whatever I needed to create, where I thought I didn't have it before. And all I needed was a little bit of fire. And I'm self-motivated. Yeah. Sometimes I just need to call somebody and say, hey, girl, all right, here's my deal. I don't have time. And then they go, you have time? You had 2 minutes to call me today. You have 2 minutes to create. And our final words of encouragement are, just do it. Start with 5 minutes. Thanks for joining me for another HolySmorgasBlog.
Guest contributions aren't necessarily the same as or representative of the host, program, or affiliate. The studies and views here aren't necessarily an exhaustive knowledge of scripture or life. Please confirm for yourself by studying the word in context. It's recommended to do so slower than this disclaimer.